is always the answer. Um, Now this obviously requires a little bit of context. So the Miata is a type of car, specifically the Mazda Miata, created or started in 1990. And Miata's always answered is sort of an acronym for Miata, MIATA. So it's sort of a silly saying that goes along with the Miata and is known by a lot of car enthusiasts. Continuing on, we have the background. From left to right, we have the first, second, third, and fourth generation Mazda Miatas. Like I said, the first started in 1990, and we still have the current generation today. So, I mean, that's 29 years, or 28 years of Miata. It's definitely a very successful car. Going further back with the background, it all started with Tom Matano and Bob Hall. Tom Matano was a successful designer in Japan because Mazda is a Japanese company. He was hired to come to California along with Bob Hall to design the first Mazda Miata. And they took a lot of influence from the 1960s British roadsters, the MG Midget and Lotus Elan specifically, pictured on the right here. Now those cars were known for being lightweight, a little bit low power, so they weren't extremely quick in a straight line, but they were great around the corners, and people really loved it for that. So they were definitely very successful among car enthusiasts, but their drawback was that they weren't very reliable. So, they broke down, parts were expensive, so Mazda really focused on fixing those issues, and they did. The Miata is still lightweight, still underpowered, but it's a lot more reliable, and they kept the price down, which is a big point that I'll be talking about later. All right, talking about enthusiasts. Just like any hobby, there are enthusiasts. There are shoe collectors, watch collectors. Same thing with cars, there are enthusiasts. So in my opinion, the three main ways someone becomes an enthusiast, and especially for me, were through movies, parents and peers, and family inheritance. So like a lot of people, I've seen Cars and The Fast and the Furious, and that's, I think, where it all really started with me. And continuing on with parents and peers, I remember, sitting in the living room or whatever with my dad and my uncle. They'd be talking about, the latest cars, the newest specifications and technology coming out, and I thought it was really interesting. And eventually I started researching it, and I would be able to join in on the conversation and really understood it on a deeper level, and that really extended my enthusiasm. Next was family inheritance. So on the bottom right here is actually my grandfather's World War II sidecar motorcycle. This picture was taken by my dad in, I think, the early 2000s. I don't have a current picture of it, but we actually recently restored it, just last year actually. So it's just, sort of a piece passed down through the family, and I think for a lot of people this is another reason why they get into being a car enthusiast. It's a lot about nostalgia. Now here we're getting a little bit more personal, but when I was really young, I remember going to Blockbuster, and I saw this movie. It had an old Volkswagen Bug. At the time I knew what that was, and the movie's called Herbie Fully Loaded. So it follows a, like I said, Volkswagen Beetle from the 1960s. It used to be a race car, but it was put in the junkyard because it was not successful. So on the left, it's shown in the junkyard. It's obviously not running. It's missing a wheel and tire. It's really dirty. It's probably rusted. So these people came along and restored it and became what you see on the right, a successful car. It looks great. Won a championship. And the reason why I bring this up is because we find this sort of formula throughout literature. There's an underdog that you root for, and they overcome and win something. So this is especially important, and I wanted to bring it up because it actually relates to the Miata. So, like I said, the Miata is designed after the 1960s British roadsters. They were loved at the time, but they were, like I said, they were not reliable, so they broke down, and a lot of them became what you see on the left there. So Mazda came along and restored them, restored the sort of the heart and soul behind the car, I guess, if you will. And it became something very successful with the Miata. So it's sort of a metaphor for the Miata, and it's sort of why I think a lot of people really enjoy the Miata. It was an underdog and became very successful. Now here we'll be going to a video I'm sure a lot of us know who Jay Leno is, but for those who don't, he was a very successful late night talk show host during the 2000s and 2010s. But a little less known is that he owns a lot of cars. He probably has over 100 cars, many of which are six figures, but he still has a place for his old 1990s Mazda Miata. And here we have him talking about that.
Yeah. Well, I've heard about the origins of the car, but let's go out and drive it.
Well, when I get in this car, I realize this is all I really need. Plenty of power, fun to drive, good handling. I love the look of the car, I love the size of the car. It's easy to position on the road. Gearbox, very nice. You really enjoy shifting it. Clutch is light enough so as not to be a hindrance. Weight distribution is nice, doesn't plow. This is where this car really shines. You can take it to $7,000 in every gear. It's not about going fast, it's about going swiftly.
Alright, so it's obvious how much Jay Leno really enjoys this car. He has a place for it in his garage and he takes it out occasionally. Jay Leno sort of touched on this. The car does not have very much power, but it's still able to put a smile on the owner's face, as you can see with Jay Leno right here. Now, the title of the presentation is Miata is always an answer. That's sort of the saying, so there should be questions and answers. So these are some of the common questions that I could come up with, and I'm going to end with a sort of more difficult question that comes along. So what if you commute? Now the car is really cheap. I haven't really touched on the price yet, but you can find a great example for $6,000. And if you want something more used, very high mileage, maybe a couple problems with it, then you're looking at around $3,000. So for a lot of people, it's a great first car. And it comes with great gas mileage and cheap consumables like brakes, tires, and fuel. So in that aspect, I think it's a great commuter. What if your concern is safety? This is obviously a common concern among new drivers. The car, as Jay Leno touched upon, and I think I mentioned, the car does not have very much power. So it takes a long time for there to be some sort of issue with speed. And even then, the first generation Miata was actually one of the first cars to come out with airbags when it was required. So that's great. What if it snows? I also mentioned that the consumables are relatively inexpensive for this car. You can get a full set of new tires, winter tires, for around $400. So a lot of people, when they go out when it's snowing, they're using their normal all-season tires, and that's definitely a problem when it comes to safety, because that means you're slipping and sliding around more than usual. So if you can get a cheap set of winter tires specifically designed for the snow, it really helps out with safety. And finally, what if I need more room for passengers? Now the Miata, among all generations, were 2 seats. They never came out with a 4-seater, even with the larger one. So this one's a little more difficult, but the car itself is very cheap. Like I said, $3,000 to $6,000 for a good example. So for a lot of people, I think this would be a great secondary car, weekend car, maybe something you can take to the track, or something that you can work on with your friends and your family, that sort of thing. So in that case, you'll definitely have your sedan along its side, or a van along its side, a 4-door, 5-seater sort of situation. So I think it's very difficult to come up with a question that it isn't an answer to. And that's all I have today. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, please let me know.